preach without my glasses on. It's less scary. So you've shown up on a Growth Sunday, a Sunday where people involved in worship are in different positions than what they're used to. They're stretched a little bit more. And hopefully you've been blessed this morning as I have been. I thought the singing was fantastic this morning. I've really appreciated it. I thought communion was great, and I'm not saying that just because he was my son. But I want to thank Daniel for relinquishing his pulpit for a Sunday. He asked me to do this some weeks ago, and because the men's retreat was last week, I was thinking, I don't know that I'm going to have time to do both, but I always feel guilty saying no to Daniel, so I tend to say yes to him. And it's been a long time since I've gotten to do this, and I've been looking forward to it, actually. So, I want to start out in James chapter 1. I just want to touch on it a little bit because we're going to be spending most of our morning in 1 Kings. Now you say, 1 Kings, what's in 1 Kings? We'll talk about that when we get there. But James chapter 1 and verse 14 is where I want to start. And it says, but each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. I like the version that was read today because it doesn't use the word dragged away. It uses the word lured. Lured. And I think that's probably, for the most part, more accurate. We do tend to get dragged away at times by our sin, but really more often, isn't it just lured? At a men's prayer breakfast a month ago, because I think there was one yesterday, but a men's prayer breakfast a month ago, Richard talked about the idea of blessing or bait. You see, I was listening, Richard. Blessing or bait. And I thought it was really good because he talked about how our blessings can sometimes be bait to lure us into sin. And I thought that was pretty good. I'm not a fisherman, so the whole fisherman genre kind of went over my head, but I do have one fishing story that I want to share with you guys that I think is appropriate. When I was 18, the summer after I'd graduated high school, our youth minister took a group of us to Yosemite for the Yosemite Family Encampment. Along the way, going there, we stopped at a trout farm. I don't know why we stopped at a trout farm, but we stopped, thought it'd be fun. So they had these pools, several pools, a couple feet deep at most. All these fish swimming around in there, and you could see them, right? It's only 2 feet deep. They're only a foot below the surface of the water. You know where they're at. And I fished. And let me tell you, I caught something too. Now, they told us, you know what? If you have a little patience and you try, you can sometimes catch them without using any bait. So I tried that. Put the hook in there. At first, they were just ignoring it. Then I kind of wiggled it around a little bit. Before I know it, one snatched at that hook, and I was able to pull him out. And I got going through my mind these ideas. Yeah, I'm going to have a fish dinner at Yosemite. And those ended up getting thrown away. But the point is, that fish bit that hook even though it wasn't food. And I wonder sometimes if that doesn't happen to me. It's not like something really fantastic is, Lord, I know that's not what I want. I know that's not going to help me, but still, before I know it, I'm getting dragged away, right? And so that can happen to us. And that happened to someone very famous in the Bible called Solomon. So if you'll get in your Bibles and turn to 1 Kings chapter 11, we're going to hang out there for a while. 1 Kings chapter 11. Now, most of you guys know the story of Solomon. He was the son of who? David. Yes. And after David's death, this is King David. After David's death, it was Solomon who ended up succeeding him as king. Now, when he first became king, early in his reign, God appeared to him in a dream. And he said, ask for anything you want, and it's yours. I will give it to you. And Solomon said, oh God, I am just a young boy. I don't know what I'm doing. You know what? If I was the king over a whole kingdom, I think I'd probably react much the same way. So he said, since I don't know what I'm doing, I ask that you would give me discernment or wisdom so that I can govern these people with justice. And God said, that's a pretty good answer, Solomon. He said, because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you wisdom. I'm going to give you more wisdom than anyone before you has ever had or anyone after you will ever have. But because you didn't ask for things like fame and fortune, I'm giving those to you as well, so that there will never be any king like you ever. And that's what God chose to do. He blessed Solomon so richly with all these things because he pleased God with his answer. We know something else about Solomon too. He loved women. He had, between his wives and his concubines, he had 1,000 women. Now, I don't get that. One's plenty for me, dear. But we also know he wrote the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, as some call it. And that's a love story, right? It's the whole thing between a man and his bride and all this stuff. And he loved women. And so we're going to take up the story now in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Now, Pharaoh's daughter was his first wife. He married her right after he became king and made an alliance with Egypt. He loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, his God, as the heart of David, his father, had been. I want to stop there. So he marries all these women. Now, I'm not real up and up on the whole idea of having concubines and that kind of stuff, but it was similar, at least similar to the whole idea of wives. So we can look at it from that respect. So from here on, I'm going to say 1,000 wives. Please don't correct me. It was only 700 wives. Once you get over 400 wives, it's all the same anyway, I'm guessing. So we see twice in this passage that it says he loved them. Verse 1, it says he loved many foreign women. They weren't just political alliances, were they? He loved them. Then later on, I think at the end of verse 2, it says that he held to them in love. So he loved these women. But he did something God had said not to do. He married women that would pull his heart away from God. He basically gave his heart to these women one piece at a time. One piece at a time. And so that's 1,000 pieces of his heart that he had given out to these women. Now, that can happen to us. Let's not think it's not going to happen to us. Notice what it says in verse 4. It says, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of his father David had been. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord. I want to look at that phrase for a second here. It doesn't say he totally abandoned God. It doesn't say he completely forgot about his God. It says his heart was not fully devoted to God as David's had been. See, my guess is there was still parts of Solomon's life that was devoted to God. He probably still did the sacrifices, did the festivals, did things like that. But his heart was not fully devoted to God as the heart of his father David had been. You know, this is how we're led astray. It may seem like small things. It may seem like, oh, you know, it's just a hobby. Or it's just a little vice of mine. Or just this, or it's just that, and they may seem small. Or it might even be a good thing that pulls you away. Marriage is a good thing. Maybe not 1,000 of them, but marriage is a good thing. But one piece at a time, one bit at a time, we get pulled away from God. I've heard Daniel talk about a 1% change. Usually it's in a positive light, right? If you want to make a good change in your life, just make a 1% change. You want to start getting in shape, go to the gym, but don't work out for 2 hours. Work out for 10 minutes. We can do that. And then gradually, 1%, you increase it. Before you know it, you're working out for 2 hours and feeling great, right? Goes the other way too, doesn't it? It goes the other way. And our adversary is very patient. He can get us to make those 1% changes in our lives that pull us gradually away from God, and so that we don't even notice. So 1% change, little by little, in incremental steps. Think about this. Early in his reign, Solomon had built the temple. You guys, I can't even picture what the temple looked like. It was overlaid in gold. It was built out of cedar. It was huge. It was amazing. It was magnificent. And he built it. Why? So God could put his name on it. So God could be seen as being magnificent and being a God that provides for his people. Solomon was faithful to God, and he did this out of the love of his heart. But now, look in verses 7 and 8 of the same chapter. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. Now, Chemosh and Molech, I looked them up. It uses the term detestable after both of them. You know why? Because worship with them always included human sacrifice. And with Molech, it's usually an infant sacrificed in fire. And that is what Solomon was supporting. He might not have been there doing the sacrifices, but I'm quite sure he knew what was going on. And he was supporting it. He had built these shrines to these false gods. This very same man that built the temple is now building shrines to false gods. That is how far he fell. That is how far he got away from God. Now, there are consequences. There are always consequences to sin, always. So at the end of Solomon's life, he gets pulled away from God. God says, I'm going to pull the kingdom out of your hands, out of your son's hands, but not the whole kingdom. Most of it. So Solomon dies. His son Rehoboam ends up with the tribe of Judah. And Jeroboam, who was not of the family of David, not of the lineage of David, basically got everything else. So basically from that point on, we always hear Israel and Judah, Israel and Judah. They were effectively split from that point on because, why? Solomon's heart was turned from God. He did not honor God, he did not worship God, so God took the majority of the kingdom out of his hands. But A little bit was left, not because of Solomon, but because of David. So turn to chapter 15 of 1 Kings. So after Solomon's death, Israel was split. His son Rehoboam had Judah, and then Rehoboam died after a few years, and now Abijah, his son, takes over. And that's where we pick up in chapter 15, verse 1. In the 18th year of the reign of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, Abijah became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 years. His mother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. He committed all the sins of his father, the sins his father had done before him. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his forefather had been. Nevertheless, listen to this. For David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by raising up a son to succeed him and by making Jerusalem strong. It wasn't because of Solomon. It was because of David. Because why? His heart was fully devoted to God. So now, 4 generations later, he still has an heir on the throne because his heart was devoted to God. And when you think about it, by this point, David had been dead for, 40, 17, 3, about 60 years. David had been dead for about 60 years, and God is still honoring him by having one of his ancestors on the throne. So not only does sin have consequences, but so does devotion to God, right? So let's talk about David for a second here. Isn't it interesting how David's son, Solomon, can allow himself to be pulled away from God when David himself was wholeheartedly devoted to God his whole life? His whole life. But wait, Dan, don't forget, he sinned, didn't he? And we know, unfortunately, about David's sin. We know about his dalliance, if you want to call it that, with Bathsheba. We know how he tried to hide it, tried to cover it up. He brought her husband, Uriah, back from battle, tried to get him, oh, you're doing a great job out there in battle. Why don't you go spend the night with your wife? You know what I mean? When Bathsheba became pregnant, he tried to make it so that it looked like it was Uriah's. That didn't work. So then David had Uriah killed. And so at this point, David's probably thinking, I got away with it. I got away with it. So the whole pregnancy of Bathsheba, after the baby is born, and it took me a while to realize this, but after the baby was born was when Nathan the prophet came to him and told him the story and said, you, David, are that man. You have robbed Uriah of his own wife and then have killed him. I think David's response to that is very telling. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't try to make excuses. His phrase, I have sinned against the Lord. That was his response. Now, at the men's retreat last week, we talked about fear. We discussed not letting fear of failure keep you from doing what you should. Because we all fail. All of us. And we talked about not letting failure define us, define who we are, but rather how we respond to that failure. How did David respond to his failure? Very easy. It's in Psalm 51. Psalm 51, I'm just going to read excerpts from this very beautiful psalm. This he wrote right after he was approached by Nathan, and he was convicted by Nathan's words. He said things like, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin, for I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me." Or how about, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence, or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me." Later on he says, "Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice." That is a man wanting to get back into relationship with God. Those are the words of a man realizing he'd failed. And what was he going to do next? Was he going to continue to fail? No. He was going to turn his heart back to God. So you see, just as things can pull our hearts from God one piece at a time, we can give our hearts back to God one piece at a time when we realize that they've left us, that they've fled us, or that our hearts have fled God. So that was David's response to his failure. And that, frankly, that kind of thing is why he's known as a man after God's own heart. Because he was after it, he pursued it. And that was a good example of him pursuing it. Now, all of us are seeking something in our lives. I think maybe 1,000 wives might have been Solomon's quest for meaning in his life. Read Ecclesiastes sometime, and you'll see Solomon's searching for something, and just his lack of being able to find it. Vanity, all is vanity. It's a chasing after the wind. These kind of things he's saying about life after he spent his whole life searching for something. We can give our hearts away in search of something, or we can give them to God fully. When I was a kid, I've got a fond memory. There was often jigsaw puzzles laid out on the table. My mom liked doing jigsaw puzzles, and I'd get in there and do them with her. And I kind of did this little thing. I was a little snot sometimes. I would take a piece of the jigsaw puzzle and I'd hide it. And I would hide it because I wanted to be the one to put that last piece in there. This 1,000-piece puzzle that she's been spending days and days on, and I got to put the last piece in. Now, I think she kind of knew I had it, but that's beside the point. The point is, what piece of your heart are you hiding from God? What piece of your heart are you unwilling to surrender to God? Because he wants it all. He wants it all, and Satan only wants a little bit of it. But, as we can see from Solomon and David's example, giving all of our hearts to God has such a better return on our investment than giving our hearts away to other things. So, if you need to surrender your heart fully to God, if you need to give him all of you, if you need to ask for prayers, if you need anything, if you have any needs, we are more than willing and ready to meet your needs where you're at. So if you have a need, you can come forward as we stand and sing.